Welcome to A Little Bit Radical, a business podcast from Standing on Giants. I'm Rob, your host. Join me as I meet people and organisations who are doing things differently, challenging the status quo and, yes, might just be a little bit radical.
It's hard to think of an industry that has gone through more challenge and change in recent years than travel. Our appetite for seeing the world seems to be as high as it ever was, but with increasing awareness of our personal impacts on the planet, along with economic and political uncertainties around the world, what does the future of travel look like? One woman who might have some idea is Clare Jones, CEO of Polarsteps, a travel app people can use to plan, track and relive their adventures, now with over 10 million users around the world. Clare has recently joined Polarsteps from What 3 Words, where she was Chief Commercial Officer. Clare also has the unfortunate experience of being my classmate many years ago. Clare, welcome to the podcast.
Thanks for having me, Rob. It's nice to see you after so many years.
Yes, absolutely. I always knew you'd go far, Clare, when I hired you as producer of the wonderful student show. You know, I knew that you'd go far. Still a career highlight?
Absolutely a career highlight. Top one.
I know you're like the CEO of a really cool company now, but it's hard to top that. Anyway, let's get on with the serious stuff. Clare, if you are a little bit radical and you're on our podcast, so we know that you are, what in your early life set you up for that?
I think my parents and my home life were a big part of this drive to be a bit different, to have an impact in the world. So my parents themselves were very radical. They were activists, and my dad worked at the World Bank in Zimbabwe when we were kids, and my mum was a teacher, and then at some point my dad stayed at home to raise 4 girls, which is radical. Even now, actually, radical that the dad stays at home and the mum works. That's still these days not very common. So I sort of had this grounding my whole life in thinking a bit differently. And my parents were very big on caring about your impact in the world and trying to make the world better all the time in small ways and big ways. And so I think that was my kind of grounding of my childhood and my teenage years. And we would have these big old debates and discussions in the kitchen, and it was a really stimulating and rigorous environment for thinking about how the world should look or how it could look.
So would you say that your parents kind of didn't hold any cards close to their chest? You know, they shared information with you about the world and their perspectives and how things work. Was that common?
Yeah, so it was a very open house. For me, the center of the house was the table, the kitchen table. And you would sit there and you would have these big discussions and you would learn about things and you would challenge each other. So because with 4 children and 2 parents, that's 6 of you at a table, and you would very rarely all agree. You might all be sort of values aligned and kind of starting from a very liberal place, but you would have these massive discussions and debates. And it was a really lovely experience for basically disagreeing while loving somebody, and therefore knowing that disagreement doesn't have to mean you don't like each other, but also it was a place that you could safely learn how to experiment with concepts and how to argue and how to discuss, and also how to say sorry and get stuff wrong and apologize. And yeah, so it was a really open environment where you could safely challenge some of those boundaries. And that was a really positive thing.
Yeah, how important to learn that you can completely disagree with someone and still love them completely. You know, I think that's something that we're struggling with in society a bit in recent years.
I think also a nice thing that they did was they always used to say, we learn from you. And that was a lovely thing, because I think there are things that you don't realize are maybe old-fashioned or conservative beliefs that you might want to overcome. And I think when kids are in your life, kids can think differently and they also absorb different lessons and they can teach you. And so that was always a lovely thing they taught us, that it wasn't just that we learned from them, it was also that they learned from us as well.
Oh yeah, absolutely. Anyone who spent time with young people is just fascinating. And it's an awesome well of insight and different ways of thinking about things. Even when they're only 3, you know, and you look at it, it's like, well, do you know what? I never thought of playing with a train like that. But yeah, that's actually quite fun. As an adult, Clare, do you think you've become more radical or less radical? And what's been behind that?
So I think teenage me would feel like I've become very not radical. So teenage me was a big old activist hippie who would be horrified that I'm in a capitalist job. So I think in some ways, the thing that I learned as I got older was that a lot of the problems that I cared very deeply about are complicated to solve. And I kind of had this vision. And actually, I've one example of this. So I used to waitress a lot. That was how I funded my studies and travels and anything else. It was a job I actually loved. I loved waitressing. I liked giving people food and making them happy. And once I was doing this one where you would go and you would work at these big gigs. I think it was at Wembley. It was a stadium like Wembley. And I remember that we were all kind of temporary workers and they weren't treating us well at all. So they weren't letting you have a break, and you'd had to arrive at something like 6 a.m. And by the afternoon, you hadn't had a break, you hadn't had any food or water. And I remember trying to get everyone around me and being like, guys, if we just all stop working at the same time, they'll have to do something about it. If I just stop on my own, it won't do anything. Whereas if we all do it, and in my head, the way that was going to go was everyone would be like, down tools, let's go, have a revolution. And we would have this wonderful success and they would have to treat everybody better. But of course, what actually happened is everybody was like, I really need this job. Stop causing trouble. I can't afford to not have this job. And that was a really important moment for me because I was like, wow, like this idea that you can just come in and with no context and no information and really very little understanding and just change things radically was actually quite an important lesson. And I think after that, and for lots of other reasons, I learned that when you're trying to create change, it is often complicated and nuanced, and you have to be patient and you have to try and work within a system that exists, and you can try and change the system, but that not everything is as easy as it seemed. I think when I was 14, I thought, oh, it would just be so easy to change the world. And I think I learned a lot about the grey areas and the nuance.
I'm so glad you shared that, Claire. I've been thinking about that a lot recently as well, actually, from around the same age. And then it's the kind of university years where we met each other. I think I just thought that the reason that people didn't think like me was probably just because, I don't know, the idea hadn't been communicated well enough to them. It was just wrapped up in this wonderful, exciting argument. Then obviously everyone would be like, oh yeah, sure, completely redistribute wealth and chuck this out and, and all that stuff. I've gone through exactly the same process where realizing that everything's much more grey, everything's nuanced, everything has to progress by compromise as well. There's no huge debate victories and then suddenly, oh, I bow down to you and your wonderful idea, we're going to do that one now. It all has to be much more gradual. So thank you for sharing that.
And I think also the thing that I have learned as well is that the things you can do on an individual level can be really impactful. And actually, I have an example of you with this, which is that I've been vegetarian for a very long time. And I always sort of thought I should probably be vegan. So I was kind of reading the books and all of the arguments that I had for being vegetarian also applied to veganism. But actually, a thing that really helped me was other people in my life demonstrating that. And I remember, I think, either when I'd just become vegan or I was thinking about being vegan, and you sent me this lovely note and you said, don't worry if sometimes you mess up. Like, it's okay. It's okay if sometimes you can't stick with it. And that was actually very relieving and was actually a very helpful thing for me, which is we don't all have to be perfect. And if 14-year-old me would be ashamed of me, that doesn't mean I shouldn't still try and be better. Like, I don't always have to get this exactly right. And I think that's a really important learning for me, that we can do the things that we individually can do and we can all try and be better every single day, but we can also help people around us by being supportive of what they're trying. Not everything has to be like, it's either black or white, and it's either you're never going to eat an animal or an animal product again, or you're a terrible person or whatever that is. And for me, they're relaxing into this idea that we're doing our best and we can improve and we can support each other to do that just with our individual ways of interacting was a nice learning.
Oh, thank you very much. And actually, the direction, not perfection, I think is what I said to you at the time. And I'm practicing what I preach there at the minute because, bombshell, listeners to this podcast will know that I have been a vegan for a long time. But in the last few months, I have gone back to being vegetarian just because of various factors in my life, health, etc. And I've just been finding it easier to be vegetarian again. I'm sure I'll go fully plant-based vegan again at some point in the future. But I kind of had to do that reflection myself, actually, and go, actually, this is taking up too much brain space right now, and I'm going to go back for a while to being vegetarian. I'd always had a vegetarian on holiday rule, so it's not like I'd never... Maybe I just decided I need a sort of permanent holiday in my mind for now. But thank you for sharing that, Claire. And I think that's right. When you have people in your life that support you in trying to be a little bit better, that's great. I'm a big believer that if everyone could just do sort of 10% extra good, that would make a huge impact.
It also makes you, not because someone tells you to, but because you see someone else doing it. So my sister, for example, she runs this flight-free holiday company. So they do train travel. And Kat, for a very long time, hasn't taken a plane. And Kat has got 2 kids and they love to travel. And she regularly gets on the Eurostar with the children and goes across and explores Europe. And that has inspired me to do much better in my personal life. I have got planes, so I'm not flight free. But now when I'm going around Europe, I'm so much more likely to go, there's a night train from Vienna to Amsterdam. Or I could get that train and I could stop in Germany on the way. And that has been not because Kat told me to do that, but because she showed me that it was possible to do that. And if she can do it with 2 kids, I can probably do it just myself. So that's another example where it's not lecturing someone. It's not debating and winning an argument. It's just all of us being the best we can on that day and showing other people how we can be the best they can as well.
Yes. We sometimes, I think, don't appreciate how much just showing the way is a form of activism, if you like, or trying to create the change you want. And it's a bit slower because no one turns around and goes, oh, suddenly I will now do exactly what you do. But it is very, very powerful. That's a good segue, isn't it, into your work as we start talking about travel. So you've just taken on this role as CEO of Polarsteps. Tell us all about Polarsteps and what you're trying to achieve there.
So Polarsteps, it's an incredibly special company, actually. It's one of the most amazing things. I've been there since June and now it's October. So not very long, but it feels like a real coming home, actually, for me, of a place that I feel incredibly happy and excited about what we're building. So this was actually brought about by founders who are themselves incredibly radical in lots of ways. One of them, Nick, was in the middle of the Atlantic Ocean and wanted to keep his friends and family up to date. This is kind of pre-smartphone, pre-WhatsApp, etc., share location. And so he set up a server in the Netherlands and would send it via SMS, lat-long coordinates and little updates. It basically went a bit viral in where he was from in the Netherlands. And that basically was the beginning of Polarsteps. So Polarsteps, basically the idea is it's the place you go whenever you want to think about traveling, when you want to get inspired about where you might want to go, what you want to explore. It's the place you go when you are traveling and you want to tell the 5 or 6 people you love most in the world, your followers, and you can share what you're doing with them. Key thing in that is it's very real. So you're not going to be just sharing the beautiful sunset you might put on Instagram. You might, in my case, my Polarsteps from the summer talks about when I went up a mountain with my sister and her kids on e-bikes. And I felt very embarrassed for the first hour because I just was exhausted and I was watching this 8-year-old race on ahead. And then at some point, Kat was like, are you using this correctly? And then worked out I wasn't using the E at all. So I've just been cycling up a very big, and I would never have done that had I known, because I have no desire to cycle up mountains. That's the version of me that you get in Polarsteps, is the clumsy, silly, couldn't work out how to use an e-bike version. So Polarsteps is a place that you can share for yourself and for the closest people that you love, what you're up to on your holiday. And then, of course, the lovely thing, and actually for me, is now when I look at my Polarsteps and I've got a trip I put in from 2015, and those trips are actually even more powerful. The further you are away from the trip that you took, the more amazing it is to revisit it. And a key thing with this is when you look at Polarsteps, so that the map is a really important part of this. So when you download the app and you play with the map is really important. And what that does is it shows us that multi-destination travel is the most beautiful kind of travel. So this is not, you don't get on a plane and go to a beach and then come back. I mean, for some people that works and that's great, but for Polarsteps users, these are people who want to explore the world. And that could be doing the Appalachian Trail, which looks amazing on a map, but it could also just be going around a village in France and then another little village and seeing the locals. But that kind of movement is really important, so that as you're exploring the world, you're getting to know the world. You're not just flying over it. You're going through it and you're exploring it and you're finding different people and different cultures and feeling a part of it. And I think that's a really lovely thing that travel can do, is help us get to know the world and each other better, and hopefully therefore help us take care of each other and the world better.
Amazing. Yeah, the real traveling of traveling. And am I right in thinking that there's an element to the app where you can seek inspiration from other users who've traveled to certain places and creating guides and that kind of thing?
Yeah, exactly. So if you're just daydreaming about where you might like to go for your next trip, you can go in there and you can either look at, so we've got an amazing editorial team who've put together specific guides. So I'm actually planning a trip in Mexico, and I just was looking at some guides for a place called Merida that they'd put together. So it's both curated content and also lots of user-generated content. So we've now got 12 million users. And so we've got loads and loads and loads of trips that they've done. And so you can look at other people's trips. Some of them are public and some of them are private. But if they're public trips, you can look at them. And lots of people make them public because they want to share these amazing discoveries and these amazing adventures that they've had.
What's the most life-changing or most impactful experience of travel that you've had personally?
One example in life was going to Malaysia to visit my sister who was briefly living there. So this is the big sister who's ended up the CEO of a travel company. Shocking. She and her partner were in Malaysia, and I was at university, so pretty young, and I went to go and spend time with them. And that was because Kat is an amazing person to travel with, because she is not going to do what everyone else does. She is going to find the most beautiful spot to visit, and she's going to find an amazing little street food place. She just met someone in the temple and they told her about it. It will be something like that. She's an incredible person to travel with. So I actually think having a grounding of following my big sister in the way she travels was a really nice way to learn. But the other answer to that is more about work. So I used to travel a lot in 3 words. I was on planes and traveling around most of each month, probably. And there was a point where I found it totally exhausting and I kind of hated it. So I would basically be flying into a place, going to meetings, probably sitting in the hotel and eating in my room and sitting on my laptop. And then one of the trips I went with a colleague and he was like, absolutely not. This is not what we're going to do. We're in San Francisco. We're going to go and explore San Francisco. And we went rollerblading. And I don't know how to rollerblade, so I went falling over and he went rollerblading. And we got on bikes and we cycled to the bridge, which was covered in fog, which was beautiful. The fog in San Francisco is called Carl. So Carl was there and we went out and had amazing food. And actually, because I traveled a lot with this colleague and he's someone who is amazing at finding incredibly interesting things to do. And after that, I started to make it a rule that whenever I went somewhere, I would always do something in that place. So if I was in Dallas for one night, I would do something in Dallas that made me fall in love with the place. And it was like a rediscovery of how lucky I was to get to travel with work. For so long, I'd been like, I'm so exhausted. I'm so jet lagged. I feel really stressed and tense that I have to travel all the time. And there was a total mindset shift, which is how lucky I am to get to see these places, to get to go to Dallas for one evening and meet some local people and go to an incredible DJ gig. What an amazing thing that I got to do. And so that was also really transformative for me, which was that travel can refresh you. It can remind you that this world is beautiful and you're so lucky to be in it. And yeah, that was a really helpful thing for me to remember how lucky I was to get to travel. And then after that, I never got exhausted with work traveling. And I get physically tired, but I wasn't ever burnt out in the way that I had been when I wasn't exploring places.
How interesting. Yeah, I think a great lesson. And like you say, it was kind of a mindset shift. I'm sure that there's lots of things that make us feel like that when it comes to work as well. But with a mindset shift, we can look at it as filling you up, interviewing people for a podcast, for example. Joking, of course. This always fills me up. Always does. So you're a new CEO. It's your first CEO role. Tell us about the moment where you found out that presumably the founders of Polarsteps said, yes, Claire, we want you to be CEO. Take us to that moment.
So the strange thing is it doesn't feel like there was a moment. So we spent ages and ages and ages getting to know each other. And there wasn't one moment where it was like, we're going to do this together. It just sort of felt inevitable.
Wasn't like the X Factor where they sort of said, yeah.
No, they pressed a button. Each time we would speak or each time we would meet, all of us, well, at least my experience of it was we all just felt good together. Like we all have really different skill sets, as they all do between themselves as well. And we had this amazing dinner once when I was in Amsterdam, and it was fun and funny. And they spent half an hour talking about one strategic question in a really interesting way, and then all agreed at the end, despite all disagreeing at the beginning of the conversation, which was really interesting to see. And it just, the whole way through, it just felt like, oh, I could see myself in this group of people working with these. And they're also all just wonderfully kind, wonderfully interesting. And that is so much of the lovely thing about work, is if you can be around wonderfully kind and wonderfully interesting people, then it just gives you joy and it means you want to go and do your job every day. So yeah, it just sort of, it felt very inevitable the whole time.
What a lovely feeling. And I saw that soon after you started, one of the first things you chose to do was kind of join the front line, the customer support team. Why did you do that? And what did you learn from doing that?
So actually, everybody does that. So everybody who joins Polarsteps sits with the customer support team. And firstly, it's a joy because the customer support team are very fun and very fun to sit around and learn from. But also, it was part of my onboarding, and it's part of everyone's onboarding. And it was such a good way to get to know the product. It was such a good way to hear from the users. It was also very beautiful because Polarsteps customer support is not like a lot of customer support because it's full of joy. Sometimes you're just replying to emails with someone being like, I'm obsessed with this app. I'm so happy. Thank you so much for existing. I had a lovely one that I had to reply to that was someone, and her son and his partner were traveling and she wanted to buy them a photo book of their travels as a gift. And she was like, I want to have it waiting for them when they get home as a surprise. And it's such an amazing thing. So you're basically getting this little snapshot of insight into all of these people having adventures. And a lot of the time, the people that love them being involved in those adventures. And that was a really special thing to get to sit on customer support and actually hear directly from those users. And so now I'm also in the backup team. So if there's a lot of customer support, I'm always like, please put me on the list, because I'm so delighted to talk to users and to hear from them and to also see what their problems are, because if we're making strategic decisions, we also make sure that the user voice is important in that. So it's also really important that sometimes I do sit there and look at the inbox and see what people are saying.
What do you think that says about your kind of leadership style, Claire, that you've put yourself on the backup reserve for frontline customer support?
I think because I don't really know what a CEO's job is. From what I can work out so far, my job is mostly to listen to things and to ask questions. And that includes listening to customers and it includes listening to the team. And so a thing I've done recently is put a few 30-minute slots in my diary that just say, anyone can book them. And you don't have to ask me, you can just book them. And they are full. People are constantly booking them from all across the company. And it is such a joy because I learn all these things and I get different perspectives. So if I'm thinking about, for example, monetization, I will get a totally different perspective if someone in the product team comes and talks to me and someone in the community and support team and someone in the ops team. And just having the chance to hear from them is so important in helping me make good decisions along with the others in the leadership team. And so, yeah, I think a lot of my job is listen to people, ask questions, and then put people in the room who need to be in the room together, so talk to each other. And then hopefully, we'll see, hopefully that over time leads to good decision making.
I think it's really great. And it seems like such a simple thing. And clearly to you, it's the most natural thing in the world to just make yourself available to the team. But I think so many leaders don't do that or sort of maybe fear what they're going to hear. What reassurance would you give to a leader who would perhaps be a bit nervous of opening up their calendar to absolutely anyone at any given time?
Well, in my experience, it's only additive. Even if it's feedback that you didn't expect or feedback that you might want to take personally. So the lovely thing about Dutch culture is it's incredibly direct. So people will tell you if they think something could be better. And I think that's actually a gift, right? Someone saying to me, here's something that you could do better or that the company could do better. It's not scary. It's not something that I need to feel defensive about because they are engaged with our mission. Someone who is saying, I've really been thinking about this process and I think we should improve it in these 10 ways is them saying, I'm in, let's build this incredible company together. And so I think, yeah, just don't worry about it because whatever anybody says, it's useful data. It's useful data. And you don't have to agree with everything, but even hearing the way they think about it or how they've come to that conclusion will be useful data that you can use.
I wonder how many CEOs who are demanding that their previously remote companies come back to the office have been doing that listening exercise and taking the feedback. Not sure about that one. Let's spend a couple of minutes on the future of travel, that small topic. Where do you see the future role of Polarsteps and companies like Polarsteps within the future of travel? Because it is in a period of change and challenge, right?
The thing that I am so excited about is that something like Polarsteps, which now has 12 million users, but eventually will have 100 million and then more than 100 million users, that you have a role which is not just to enable. So we're not just enabling people to share their adventures with their friends and family and reflect on them. We also have a role in helping them travel in a responsible and ethical way. And an example of this, so when I joined, the founders that run this company incredibly successfully, they're all absolute rock stars in product and tech and their various areas. And they had to take quite a big step to bring someone new in. And they were also aware that they've been the heart of a lot of the company because they're where it started. And they really believe, all of them, in traveling well and treating the environment and the people and the animals and everybody around you responsibly. And they knew that when I was coming in, that was a different person. And of course, during our interviews, we were trying to make sure we were all values aligned, but they also wanted to kind of communicate that to the team and to me during that transition phase. So they ended up writing a manifesto. And it's a manifesto, we just use it internally, but it talks about how Polarsteps has a role to play in shaping adventurous travel, which is a type of travel that helps you grow as a person and helps you be curious and helps you be adventurous, but also that is good for the world. So that is respectful. For example, if there are places where the local communities are saying, please don't go here. We hate that all the tourists are coming here and disturbing the animals or causing environmental damage. Please don't go here. It's part of our job to help guide people to find other places to go. And that's the amazing thing, is that for us, we've got this huge data set. So we know where people go and we also know where people could go. So we have an ability, particularly, so we're launching an itineraries product next year that will really allow people to say, okay, what kind of traveler am I? What do I care about in the world? What are my values? And how would I like to travel? And that's a really powerful thing that we can do, because this is the trend in travel. As we learn more, we all want to travel in a way that is good. It would never have occurred to me as a kid that some of the types of travel I was doing was negative for the community or for the animals or the environment. And now I'm learning that, and I would like to make better choices. And that's the trend we see everywhere, that people increasingly want to be good travelers. And so companies like Polarsteps have a role to play in that, which is, let's help people shape the way they travel in a way that's good for the world as well as good for them, because there is no shortage of amazing experiences. you can have incredible experiences in all kinds of places. And if people in for a while in Barcelona are saying, please don't come here, okay, you know what, we can show you a load of other amazing places that you could go, that you will adventure, because we've got this whole data set of all the places that people have been in the last decade with Polarsteps, and we're able to use that as a kind of treasure trove to help people find places to go.
I love that. And I'm a curious person, and I'm exactly in that position. I don't really know where to go. So where do you gravitate towards? Well, where everyone else goes, I suppose. And, there's nothing wrong with those places. But if there's this data and expertise to show you, well, actually, if you like Barcelona, here's another amazing city with a beach, and amazing food and all the rest. That's awesome. Yeah. So I really like the approach. I like the approach as well because it's quite tempting. It's kind of a theme of our conversation. It's quite tempting to go down the kind of moral, puritanical route and black and white and go, travel is bad, we shouldn't travel, or just completely minimize travel. And I don't think that can be a good thing for the world if people stop traveling around and experiencing what other countries are like and what other languages are like and what other cultures are like. That can't be a good thing for the world, right? We're coming to the final section of our podcast now, Claire. We've talked about travel. You have a very kind of worldly view, I would say. But what's a little bit radical change for the world that maybe you're not involved with every single day that you would like people to get behind?
So I've got very into UBI lately. So this is Universal Basic Income.
Tell us about that.
For about 12 years or so, maybe 13, I've been involved with a project in South London, which works with women who are on the street, who are sex working. And it's very difficult, and they need lots of support, and they need lots of love, and they need lots of access to services. And it's very upsetting to me that they are struggling so much when we as a society have so much. You talked earlier about redistribution of wealth. It's very difficult to imagine that we can't just redistribute wealth in some way that could make things better. Now, a lot of their problems are very complex, for sure. And housing is a really complex thing to solve. And homelessness is, and trauma is really hard to solve. And the care system is really hard to solve. But increasingly, at the moment, there are studies being done on this thing called UBI, so Universal Basic Income. And the idea behind that is that mostly the thing that makes a difference if you are poor is money, not services.
Shock horror.
Yeah. But so for a very long time, there's been this idea that we'll give you this particular thing and that will solve some of your problems. And we'll give you this particular thing over here and this something else over there. And in some ways that does work. And for some people that does work. But increasingly we're seeing there may be a more efficient way to do this, which is to give people a basic income that allows them, however much chaos is going on in their life, they don't have to then go and fill in a form to get benefits and prove that they're so sick they can't work, or prove that they're unwell, or have to do something in exchange for the benefits, which is a lot of what happens and is very, very complex. Instead, we just say, here's a universal basic income, no questions asked. You're just going to get this and it will support you for your basic needs in your life. Now, at the moment, the studies that are coming out, a lot of them in countries, for example, like Kenya. So Give Directly is an organization that does a lot here. And they've come up with some amazing results in the last few years of how impactful this is. A lot of people are really scared of it because they're like, but what if we give people money and they stop working? And all the studies, so for example, the study that came out of Kenya recently, productivity went up, not down. So we know that this doesn't necessarily mean that people will stop working. People like to work. People like to contribute to society. There are more and more studies also now in places like the US and the UK. And so I'm really excited by those, and I'm excited to see the impact of them. And what we really need now is big, large scale, 10, 15-year studies so we can really see what happens. But that for me is incredibly hopeful because we're seeing that this could be a really powerful and efficient thing. So it costs a lot. So for example, if someone is street homeless, that already costs the state a huge amount of money. Wouldn't it be amazing if we could give them that money to support them in what they need in their lives? Because those of us who do have money at our disposal know that it's amazing to be able to decide what you need. On that day, I might need loads of food. On that day, I might need something totally different. On this day, I might need to go to a park. There might be all kinds of different things that you need. And you as an individual are empowered to do that. And so I love the idea. And we'll see, right? We're going to watch these studies and see the impact societally. But I love the idea that there might be something we can do that the way in the UK we love the NHS, it wasn't that long ago it didn't exist. And the idea of a healthcare system that everybody could access for free didn't exist 200 years ago. And I love the idea that maybe we'll get to this place with this, which is that we believe everybody should have basic needs met. And wouldn't it be amazing if it's right and if it works and if in a few hundred years they look back and go, wow, of course, it's so obvious that everybody should be taken care of and have their needs met. And this might be a way to do it.
Fantastic, Claire. What an impassioned rallying cry on UBI. I'm sure everyone involved in that would love to hear you speak about it. I'm a big fan of The Rest is Politics, obviously the podcast rock stars that they are. I went to see them live this week, actually. So yeah, Rory Stewart, who runs Give Directly, doesn't he? Speaks very passionately, as you do, about this idea as well. I find there's something really fascinating to unlock there, even amongst very liberal, progressive people, and this sort of paternalistic attitude that we have. You dig a little bit and then you get to the points of, oh, but won't they just spend it on, this, or will they work? Even amongst people who you would think were, quite liberal or progressive. So there's something really interesting to unpick there. But I agree with you. I think it's a great idea. Claire, we've very sadly come to the end now. It's been wonderful to talk to you. And the last question is always the same, which is if there's someone listening to this who has a little bit of a radical idea, maybe for a business or for their personal life or a campaign about a massive economic shift they want to get off the ground, but they don't know where to get started, what advice would you give to them?
Talk to loads of people about it, because then you'll acquire friends and supporters and business partners or co-founders along the way. So I think whenever I've had an idea of something I wanted to do in work, outside of work, and it's worked because I had a group of people to do it with. So talk to as many people as possible about your idea and see who wants to come on the journey with you.
Fantastic advice, I think. And don't be too precious about your idea. There's very little value in an idea itself, I think, until it's shared and actioned. One of my favorite quotes, sound bites that's come out of this podcast, actually, is ideas don't age like a fine wine. They die on the vine. And I think that's true. You need to harvest it. You need to start working with it and getting some people involved. Otherwise, it's not going to do anything.
Yeah, absolutely.
Wonderful, Claire. Thank you very much. It's been such a pleasure to talk to you. Have a great day and hope to speak to you again soon.
Thank you so much.
Thank you for listening to this podcast. If you enjoyed it, please follow us on your podcast platform. If you'd like to appear on A Little Bit Radical or have an idea of someone we should speak to, please email podcast@standingongiants.com or get in touch with me on LinkedIn. You can search Rob Fawkes or search Standing on Giants and you'll find me there. Thank you very much and speak to you next time.